This is Greg Kelly. Donate now to Toys for Tots, which works year-round. Go to toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots supports children in need throughout the year with programs like the Toys for Tots Literacy Program. Established in 2008, it has provided over 63 million books to disadvantaged children. The Toys for Tots Literacy Program is committed to providing disadvantaged children with direct access to books and educational resources that enhance their ability to read and communicate effectively. Go to toysfortots.org.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
This Wednesday night at Russo's on the Bay in Howard Beach, the DEA is going to honor me. I don't know why, but they are. Bo Dietl and the great Paul Mauro. So with that said, Paul, big night coming up on Wednesday. Congratulations.
And to you, looking forward to it. It's going to be a great night.
It is going to be a great night. And Scott Monroe and the Detectives Endowment group there, they do a terrific job. And I'm hearing that maybe as many as upwards of 750 cops there on Wednesday. How many years did you actually serve again in the NYPD?
26.
26. When did you leave?
I'm out now. About 3.5 years, I want to say. 4 years, 3.5, I think.
3.5.
Right.
Yeah. I'm still very close to the former chief, John Schell, and he just stepped out a couple of months ago. And I ask him all the time, do you miss it? And he says, not really. I ask the same thing of Kaz Daughtry, do you miss it? And he says, not really. But they just left a couple of months ago. You're out 3.5 years. Do you miss it?
Yeah, I do. You know what you miss is the saying in the police department is I miss the clowns, not the circus, But I have to say I miss the circus a little bit as well, that being the sort of bureaucracy and the institution of the place. It's an enormous organization, and there's always a lot going on. You meet interesting people. What you miss in your heart of hearts is the mission. If you were in a good unit doing good work that felt good to you, that's the kind of thing, because it focused your life, gave you purpose, and it was work that felt good to you. But I will say the department had begun to change because the leadership had begun to change. The city's leadership had begun to change, as you know full well. And that made it a little bit easier to leave when I did. I left, it was still just at the end of the de Blasio administration into the Adams administration, early Adams administration. So, I could see the way the city was starting to go, and it was probably a good time to get out of law enforcement in this town.
Do you have a critique or a compliment? How do you think Jessica Tisch is doing in that role?
Jessica's done as well as anybody could do in that role, and that's not a backhanded compliment. I mean that sincerely. She's in a very, very tough spot. She's navigating a guy who is on record saying that he hates the agency that she leads. And, look, he tries to temper it because now that he's in that seat, he's recognizing how much he needs the NYPD. But at the end of the day, she's coming up against somebody who has a lot of power. At the end of the day, it is her boss. He has the firing ability there. And he is representative of a whole slew of the electorate that feels as he does and wants him to come through on his campaign promises to do things like defund a lot of the police, if not all the police, was the original promise. Get rid of the gang database, disband the SRG, dial back the counterterrorism program. These are all vital things that were put in place back under Ray Kelly and have continued through various iterations because they work and they're needed. And now that he's in that seat and he has to own those decisions, he's realizing why those units have been stood up. I think he's in a very tough spot. Jessica Tisch has to navigate all of that. It is not easy. And so all I would say is we're not going to do better than her in that spot, no matter how many frustrations people might have. And I think that as long as she can hang on, we should support her, because when we lose her, and I think that likely will happen at some point, God help us when he's choosing the next police commissioner.
Man, that was so well said. Paul Mauro, you just nailed it. You just nailed it. In essence, thank God for her. She's in a very tough spot. Let me tell you what a scumbag this mayor is, okay? I use that word, not you. I know Fox News may get upset. And you all brought this out on Twitter as well. I've talked about it every single day for 10 days. Every day, Paul. And that is he's quick to go on Twitter and defend Mahmoud Khalil, who basically was a campus terrorist. That's what he was, okay? Nordine Kiswani, another terrorist sympathizer. She watches Jews die like the mayor's wife. She gets off on it. These are the people the mayor goes on Twitter to defend, publicly defend. But when Richard Williams, an 83-year-old Army vet who survived cancer and World War II, gets thrown on the subway tracks in his city, in New York City, nothing from the mayor, nothing. Sheridan Gorman was murdered in Chicago. By the way, she's not from the city, but Westchester, not that far away. Nothing from the mayor. Illegals killing war heroes in the streets of New York. You can't get a tweet out of the mayor. But Khalil, he'll tweet about all day long. That's a bad guy, if you ask me, Paul Mauro.
Yeah, the strategy that seems to have developed in Zoran's office seems to be that he will use his soft power. And that is all the stuff that you're alluding to, tweeting, going to events, showing his face, giving us that big, bright smile. He'll use the soft power to assuage the complaints of his far, far left. But when it comes to the practicality of actually managing the city, so far, he has not pulled the trigger on some of his bigger promises to those constituents, thankfully, because had he done so, we wouldn't have, as I said, a gang database, SRG, and all these other initiatives that are so vital to our safety. Now, that's not to say that everything is going in the right direction. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that the transit crime numbers don't look good and continue to creep up. The homeless situation is very clearly getting worse. He's done all kinds of configurations here. He's twisted himself into a pretzel relative to the budget and some of the money he wants to spend that we just don't have, and it's going to lead, if he gets his way, to an exodus from the city. So I'm not putting a too happy a face on it, but that said, he has not followed through on a lot of what he said he would do, and it seems like the needle he's trying to thread is he'll kiss the babies, he'll show up at the events, he'll be loud on Twitter in support of the constituents that you and I are talking about here. But he's not really following through for them yet. And that can't last, Sid. There's going to be a point where they call BS on him and say, hey, SRG is showing up at our protests. They're actually doing their job. We don't want this. We elected you to get rid of them. What are you going to do? So he's hanging on, I feel, relative to his hard left base by a thread at this point. And at one point, that's going to run out.
Oh, God, I hope you're right. This is a great conversation. Paul Mauro, Fox News, spent about a quarter of a century as a cop here in New York City, so he spent a lot of time there talking about the police because he's getting honored, and deservedly so, Wednesday night in Howard Beach. I follow you on Twitter. I watch you on Fox News. I just think you're really smart and really good on TV. And I see, some of your tweets, and I tweet a lot of very similar stuff. One thing that continues to shock me, the amount of people in this country that are rooting against us in this war. So if you came out in the beginning and you didn't like this war because, you didn't like it, okay? You thought America was, Trump was America first and no more new wars. This is not a new war, folks. Iran started this 47 years ago, okay? But whatever. You think that America, Trump, America first, he's not doing that. You listen to Tucker or whatever else you do, And then once you do that, you put yourself in a position where it's hard to come back from that. So now you almost have no choice, but to actually root against your own president. So you get your narrative out there, your own president and your own country against a terrorist regime. Is that not shocking to you?
It is shocking. And, look, I get having ambivalence about the war because our history of getting embroiled in the Middle East is not a stellar one. Nobody's is, because it's so difficult to operate in that terrain and there are so many conflicting winds blowing through the place that you never know who your friends are and who your enemies are day to day. But that said, and it can become a quagmire. We all know that. I'm talking about Iraq here. But that said, once the trigger is pulled, it's all bets off as far as I'm concerned. Once you have people in theater and the American boots are, if not on the ground, then near to on the ground, and we have those equities, then frankly, I think it's disgusting to be rooting for anything but a full American victory
Agreed.
that secures that area of the world. Because, I mean, here's the thing. I think that, look, if you don't pull the trigger on this war, then accept the following. We would have probably inside of a couple of years, certainly within the early part of the next presidential administration, an Iran with an operable nuclear warhead, more than one, with ICBMs capable of delivering them to the American East Coast. That's all but a fact. Now, if you can live with that, and you're convinced that mutually assured destruction would keep the Iranians in check, then, okay, you've made that choice to live on that, take that flyer. But if you examine the rhetoric of the mullahs, I mean, they practically have death to America printed on their money, and they can't last forever. And at some point, when their backs are to the wall again, whether it's us or the Israelis or the Gulf states, and they're deciding who they're going to reach out and try to strike out of some state of petulance, well, you'd have to imagine that an ICBM with a nuke on it headed to New York is going to be up there near a priority. And if anybody thinks I'm being fanciful, just think where we were on 9/10 and who believed that two planes would be flying into the Trade Center and another into the Pentagon. So I think that, look, if you're willing to go on faith and say mutually assured destruction, just like with the Soviets, which barely worked, there were a couple of near misses there too. But if you felt like mutually assured destruction would work with Iran, then okay, you're entitled to that belief. I am of the opinion that that's probably not a risk worth taking. And Donald Trump, who has better intelligence than I do at this point, made the assessment that if not now, when? And when you consider that every president before him has just done a delaying tactic to kick it down range, because that's all the JCPOA was under Obama. The so-called Iranian nuclear deal was just a delaying tactic to get it down range to the next guy. Trump is the first guy that said, we can't afford to wait anymore. They're getting too close, and I'm not risking it. That is the calculus. You may not like it, but that is it. And, foreign policy is always a choice between a bad choice and a worse choice. And Donald Trump had to take the bad choice here, but now it's done, and there's only one thing left to do, and that's to win it.
Listen to this podcast now on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Polonis.
I'm Dr. Peggy Polonis. Join me on each episode where I unravel the story that shaped leaders, tracing the thread that led them where they are today. Because leadership isn't born in adulthood. And thank you once again for joining us on the Leadership Thread, education, ethics, and sustainability.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.